Deep within the forgotten archives of the Clover Kingdom, a localized tremor shatters the ancient containment seals. Exactly 10 years have passed since the legendary magic knight Julius Novachrono cast his ultimate temporal spell to trap a dangerous rebel. That rebel was none other than Conrad Leto, the charismatic 27th Wizard King, whose radical ideals threaten the very fabric of the noble society. Free from his decade-long imprisonment, Conrad stretches his arms wide as dark, volumetric magical energy floods the chamber. Meanwhile, the Grand Colosseum of the Clover Kingdom echoes with the thunderous cheers of thousands of spectators gathered for the annual Magic Tournament. On the dirt battlefield below, Asta leaps high into the air with a massive, pitch-black anti-magic sword gripped firmly in both hands. Sweat drips from his brow as he deflects a barrage of incoming elemental spells with a heavy metallic clang. Up in the royal viewing box, the modern Magic Knight captains watch the intense match with critical, discerning eyes. Suddenly, the bright blue sky above the Colosseum turns a violent, sickly shade of deep crimson without any warning. The cheerful roar of the massive crowd instantly dies down, replaced by a tense, breathless murmur of confusion. Asta lands heavily back on the ground, his sharp instincts instantly screaming at him that danger is imminent. A massive rift in space tiers open directly above the center of the battlefield, crackling with volatile green sparks. From the center of the spatial tear, Conrad Leto slowly descends, his ornate tattered cloak billowing wildly in the wind. The Magic Knight captains rise to their feet in unison, recognizing the face of the deceased tyrant instantly. Conrad raises his hand toward the sky, and a massive, multi-layered sword of pure light materializes before him. He announces his ultimate plan to cleanse the corrupt continent and forge a completely egalitarian society from the ashes. Without waiting a single second, a senior magic captain leaps forward, launching a massive fireball at the intruder. Conrad merely smiles as his glowing Imperial sword absorbs the entire fiery assault effortlessly within a split second. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he redirects the absorbed fire magic back down at the grandstands as a devastating wave. Massive explosions tear through the stone tiers, sending panicking spectators fleeing in every possible direction. Asta charges forward with incredible speed, his heavy black boots kicking up huge clouds of dust behind him. He leaps toward the hovering tyrant, swinging his massive anti-magic sword in a wide, horizontal arc. Conrad blocks the massive blade effortlessly using a dense, glowing magic shield generated from his left hand. The sheer shockwave of their physical collision ripples outward, shattering the remaining glass windows of the viewing boxes. The ancient king notes Asta's complete lack of magic, calling him an interesting but ultimately flawed anomaly. Asta roars back at him, stating that his willpower is his magic and he will never give up on protecting his kingdom. Conrad releases a massive burst of kinetic energy, blowing Asta violently back down to the hard stone floor. Asta crashes heavily into the dirt, rolling several times before slamming back first into a thick stone wall. Several elite modern magic knights step forward to form a protective perimeter around their fallen, struggling comrade. Conrad hovers high above them, his tattered cloak swirling as he begins chanting a forbidden multi-layered incantation. Massive chains made of dark green light erupt directly from the ground beneath the entire stadium structure. The entire Colosseum begins to groan and violently shake as the deep foundations are forcefully torn away from the earth. Dust and heavy boulders rain down upon the trapped knights as the massive arena slowly lifts into the air. Up in the sky, a massive portal opens to reveal a colossal, floating fortress made of ancient, weathered white stone. This floating weapon is designed to drain the magical essence of anyone trapped within its massive high-altitude perimeter. The entire tournament arena is pulled upward rapidly, locking directly into the base of the massive floating fortress. The modern knights find themselves completely cut off from the ground, suspended miles above the surface of the kingdom. Conrad lands gracefully at the highest point of the newly integrated arena, his radiant sword resting by his side. Asta forces himself back onto his feet, using his massive black sword as a crutch to support his weight. Suddenly, 3 massive sarcophagi made of solid, glowing crystal rise slowly from the floor behind Conrad Leto. Within the glowing crystal columns, the distinct silhouettes of 3 historical, long-dead wizard kings slowly begin to stir. The blinding flash of the arena's teleportation left Asta and his comrades coughing in a dense cloud of dust. Above them, the massive stone structure of the stadium groaned as it tore completely away from the earth. Noel grabbed Asta by his collar to pull him away from a falling piece of heavy masonry. Nero hovered above them in her anti-bird form, chirping frantically to direct their escape. Klaus limped heavily behind them, his iron boots clanking against the cold stone floor of the hidden passage. Yuno pointed his glowing wind grimoire forward toward a massive, rune-carved vault door at the end of the hall. This high-security subterranean research branch held the kingdom's most dangerous experimental tools. Asta sprinted toward the center pedestal where a heavy leather sheath wrapped in dense sealing chains rested. This specialized anti-magic sheath was designed to stabilize and channel the erratic energy of his black swords. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted as a familiar, suffocating pressure crushed down on them. A swirling vortex of golden and purple magic materialized directly between the heroes and the exit. Conrad Leto stepped through the portal, holding the radiant Imperial sword casually over his shoulder. Asta immediately drew his massive Demon Slayer sword, the black anti-magic coating his right arm instantly. Conrad laughed softly, his voice echoing eerily off the reinforced walls of the subterranean facility. Noelle stepped forward, quickly summoning her sea dragon's cradle to shield the wounded knights. Conrad thrust his free hand forward, activating a sinister dark purple grimoire that levitated at his hip. Using stolen memory magic, he instantly accessed the combat history and tactical patterns of everyone in the room. Asta lunged forward to strike, but Conrad sidestepped the heavy blade with flawless, preemptive precision. Yuno fired a barrage of swift wind blades to support Asta, targeting Conrad's exposed blind spot. Without even looking back, Conrad raised his palm and blocked the entire wind assault with a solid barrier of hard light. Noelle unleashed her signature Sea Dragon's Roar, a massive serpentine dragon made of roaring ocean water. Conrad smiled broadly as the massive water dragon rushed directly toward his position. Instead of dodging, he extended the Imperial sword, which began to rapidly absorb the unique water spell into its glowing hilt. Noelle fell to her knees, gasping as her magical reserves were forcibly drained through the connection to her spell. Asta yelled in outrage, leaping high into the air to slam his heavy blade down onto Conrad's head. Conrad swung the Imperial sword upward, unleashing Noelle's own Sea Dragon's Roar back at Asta with double the original power. The massive water blast slammed into Asta, crashing him violently against the reinforced metallic ceiling of the facility. Yuno flew upward on a localized gale to catch his friend before he hit the flooded ground. Conrad walked slowly toward the altar, ignoring the combatants as he focused entirely on the sealed anti-magic sheath. He reached out his hand, intending to destroy the only artifact capable of neutralizing his stored magical energies. Asta pushed away from Yuno, dropping heavily onto the wet floor but standing firmly on his feet once more. Nero quickly activated her sealing magic, causing the chains around the sheath to tighten and fly directly into Asta's grip. Conrad turned his head sharply, his calm demeanor slipping into a look of pure, unadulterated irritation. Asta shoved his Dark Demon Dweller's sword into the specialized sheath, causing a massive shockwave of black energy to ripple outward. The expanding anti-magic wave instantly dissolved Conrad's active memory projection fields, clearing the air. Yuno seized the moment of disruption, opening a massive gale portal directly behind their wounded comrades to evacuate them. Conrad raised the Imperial sword high, the blade crackling with the stolen magical attributes of multiple elements. Asta stood shoulder to shoulder with Yuno, both preparing to unleash their maximum power to buy time for the retreat. Conrad smirked as the entire subterranean facility began to collapse from the sheer weight of his gathering magical energy. Heavy stone pillars shattered into dust, completely blocking the path between Asta and the escape portal. Through the settling dust, a massive, multi-elemental energy blast erupted from Conrad's blade, heading straight for them. Asta braced himself, raising his newly sheathed sword to block the incoming cataclysm head-on. As the magical blast collided with Asta's shield, the ground beneath his feet completely gave way, sending him plummeting into an abyss. From the edge of the collapsing rift, Yuno reached out desperately, but the falling debris completely severed his view. high above the ruined rift. Conrad Leto's laughter echoed darkly as he prepared to ascend back to his floating fortress. Below the swirling vortex of the flying fortress, the battered remnants of the Magic Knights gathered inside a hidden underground staging area. Asta bound his bleeding arm tightly with a fresh strip of clean white cloth. Noelle watched him silently while trying to steady her hands, which were still trembling from the previous encounter with Conrad. Yami stepped forward into the center of the room and slammed his massive hand down onto the wooden table. He declared that sitting around waiting to die was never an option for the Magic Knights. Klaus quickly activated a massive magical projection showing the multi-layered defensive matrix surrounding the floating citadel. He explained that the fortress was shielded by an outer kinetic barrier and an inner magical absorption field. Sekre leaned over the tactical map and pointed to the core weaknesses hidden within the ancient barrier structure. To breach those defenses, the Black Bulls decided to transform their entire mobile base into a colossal battering ram. Magna pulled a massive lever on the control panel, causing the dark stone structure to shudder and groan violently. Finral focused his spatial magic, opening an enormous, swirling green portal right in front of the moving fortress base. With a massive roar of shifting stone, the modified base surged forward and dove straight into the glowing void. They materialized instantly in the upper atmosphere, directly in front of the colossal flying fortress. The automated defense systems of the flying fortress immediately detected the intruder and unleashed a volley of magical lasers. Gosh used his mirror magic to multiply the base's defensive armor, reflecting the incoming blasts back into the sky. Henry steered the giant stone structure, aiming its pointed bow directly at the center of the outer golden barrier. With a cataclysmic impact, the modified base slammed into the golden barrier, sending violent shockwaves through the air. Asta leaped from the crumbling front deck with his massive Demon Slayer sword raised high above his head. He struck the inner magical barrier, unleashing a surge of black anti-magic that caused the energy field to shatter like glass. As the smoke cleared, the three resurrected Wizard Kings stood waiting on the grand courtyard of the fortress. Edward Avalache stepped forward, his eyes glowing with an ancient, fanatical light as he raised his hands. He immediately cast a high-level ice magic spell, turning the ground beneath the knights into a frozen wasteland. Yami stepped in front of the advancing ice spires and swung his katana with lethal precision. He shouted for the younger knights to push ahead, while he handled this frozen old relic himself. From the adjacent palace balcony, the resurrected Wizard King Princia Funny Bunny looked down with utter disdain. She activated her Legion magic, summoning hundreds of autonomous magical soldiers clad in heavy iron armor. Mara Leona Vermilion roared with excitement and lunged directly toward the spawning army of constructs. She slammed her blazing fists into the front lines, obliterating a dozen iron soldiers in a single, explosive strike. Meanwhile, the third resurrected king, Jester Durandros, materialized directly in front of Asta with blinding speed. Jester scoffed at Asta, stating that a magicless brat had no right to stand in the presence of true royalty. He unleashed his barrier magic, projecting hundreds of sharp, crystalline green daggers that flew straight toward Asta. Asta deflected the incoming projectiles with rapid swings of his sword, sparks flying wildly from the impact. Noelle quickly stepped up beside him, unleashing a massive torrent of water to wash away the secondary wave of blades. Jester easily dodged the water torrent by sliding gracefully across the air on a floating green platform. Back on the main courtyard, Yami pressed his attack against Edward, charging forward through a blizzard of freezing snow. Edward conjured a massive ice golem that slammed its colossal frozen fist down toward Yami. Yami channeled his dark magic into his sword and unleashed a localized dimensional slash that split the golem completely in half. Over at the plaza, Mara Leona was locked in a brutal fistfight against Princia's personal Iron Vanguard. Princia watched the battlefield calmly, noting that no matter how many they destroyed, her army would never stop multiplying. Up on the central bridge, Asta noticed that the magical pressure across the entire fortress was steadily increasing. The flying fortress suddenly shuddered violently as the massive mana-draining mechanism at the core finally hummed to life. Jester smiled coldly, telling Asta that the countdown to the world's purification had officially begun. Asta forced himself back onto his feet, his eyes glowing with a stubborn, unyielding defiance. He shouted that he would break through every single one of them to stop Conrad's insane plan. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted from the central tower, revealing an even larger secondary barrier locking them all out. Noelle gasped as she realized that they were now completely cut off from the main engine room. High above the blood-red barrier, the colossal silhouette of Conrad Leto began to slowly materialize in the sky. He raised the glowing Imperial sword, causing the magical pressure across the continent below to drop dangerously. The ground beneath Asta's feet began to crumble into dust as the fortress prepared to unleash its final devastating attack. As Conrad's voice echoed across the heavens, a colossal shadow began to block out the very stars above them. The massive meteor summoned by Conrad began its slow, suffocating descent toward the Clover Kingdom. Asta gripped the hilt of his Demon Slayer sword as the wind whipped violently around his dark winged form. Across the battlefield, Yuno unleashed his Spirit of Zephyr to slice through the surrounding magical golems. Conrad laughed manically while his body began to crack from the sheer pressure of the stolen mana. Maria Leona roared as she incinerated the remnants of the resurrected kings with a final, massive fire punch. Noelle focused her Sea Dragon's roar to shield the wounded knights from falling debris. The Imperial sword Elsdosha pulsed in Conrad's hand, hungry for more life force to sustain the spell. Asta charged forward, his anti-magic trailing behind him like a cloak of shadows. Conrad swung the Imperial sword, creating a wave of stolen magic that pushed Asta back. Suddenly, the mana of every citizen in the Clover Kingdom began to flow toward the battlefield. Julius Novachrono watched from below, lending his remaining strength to the cause. Asta felt a strange, warm energy surging through his spirit as the kingdom's hope reached him. Captain Yami drew his katana and prepared his final dimensional slash to clear a path. The dimensional slash tore through Conrad's defenses, leaving him momentarily vulnerable. Asta reached out and managed to grab the hilt of the Imperial sword as it slipped from Conrad's grasp. The weight of the sword's history and power threatened to crush Asta's bones. "I'm not done yet because my magic is never giving up," Asta screamed into the void. Conrad watched in disbelief as his own sword accepted a boy with no magic. The Imperial sword transformed, absorbing the anti-magic and the kingdom's prayers simultaneously. Asta raised the gargantuan weapon above his head, aiming directly at the falling meteor. All the magic knights below raised their hands, sending their last drops of mana to Asta. With a final, earth-shaking swing, Asta unleashed the ultimate strike against the doom of the world. The meteor shattered into a million harmless sparkles of light that rained down like snow. Conrad felt the weight of his sins as the Imperial sword's stolen energy returned to the people. "You really are the next Wizard King," Conrad whispered as he finally began to fade away. Asta landed back on the solid ground of the kingdom as the flying fortress safely deconstructed. The Black Bulls rushed toward their comrade, shouting and cheering in a chaotic embrace. The threat of the ancient kings was finally laid to rest, their souls finding peace in the afterlife. Captain Yami walked up to Asta and gave him a heavy, approving pat on the head. Citizens emerged from their shelters, looking up at the now clear and beautiful night sky. The barriers between the classes seemed to thin as everyone celebrated their survival together. Julius Novachrono began the long process of rebuilding the magical foundations of the realm. Noelle looked at Asta with a soft smile, finally acknowledging his growth to herself. Yuno vowed to work even harder to keep up with his rival's incredible feat. A massive feast was held at the Black Bull's hideout to honor the heroes of the war. They took a moment of silence for those lost and for the heavy history of the kingdom. The future of the Clover Kingdom looked brighter than it ever had in 1,000 years. Asta stood on the highest tower, looking out at the world he had just saved. He knew there were still many challenges ahead, but he was ready for all of them. "I will become the Wizard King," he shouted, his voice carrying across the entire land.